Welcome to See You on the Other Side, where the world of the mysterious collides with the world of entertainment. A discussion of art, music, movies, spirituality, the weird, and self-discovery. And now, your hosts, musicians and entertainers who have their own weakness for the weird. Mike and Wendy from the band Sunspot.
Oh man, Wendy, I am excited.
You're excited too? Because I'm excited.
I am terrifically excited to get to the warm climes of Southern California.
We're going to escape from Wisconsin.
That's right. This week, for any of our California or Los Angeles area listeners, Southern California listeners, we will be performing in Anaheim, right next to Disney World. So if you're on vacation, going to some Disney, you can see us Thursday night at McFadden's. And we'll be up at 9 o'clock. We'll be playing the rest of the night at McFadden's next to Disney. And on Sunday, where are we going to be, Wen?
Sunday, we're going to be in Silver Lake in Los Angeles at the Silver Lake Lounge at 8 p.m. And these are both free shows, so please stop on by. I mean, how often can you go to a free concert anywhere, but especially in Los Angeles? I mean,
right,
it's expensive there.
So
please come and join us, or if you know anybody out there that might like to go to a free concert and meet up with us, please forward the word along, because we're always looking to meet new friends, and friendly faces in the audience is what we like to see.
Absolutely. And we'll be playing songs we wrote for the podcast. So if you guys like any of the See You on the Other Side music, that's the stuff we'll be playing at our live shows in Orange County and Los Angeles this week. So we wanted to get that red alert out. We're excited to get out of the cold, even if it's just for a few days, and have some fun in California. And of course, if we get any haunted stories or see any UFOs or anything like that, you'll be the first to know about it on the See You on the Other Side podcast. All right. And we got a really good interview for you today. Lyle Blackburn is a paranormal investigator, Fortean. He is a monster hunter.
And a musician.
And a band dude.
One of us.
So we love it. So let's get to the interview with Lyle. Lyle Blackburn is an author, musician, film producer, and cryptid researcher from Texas. His acclaimed books, Beast of Boggy Creek, Beyond Boggy Creek, and Lizard Man, reflect his lifelong fascination with legends and sighting reports of unknown creatures. We are so happy to welcome this monster hunter extraordinaire to the podcast. Lyle, thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we should start out with our first basic question. How did you get to be a weirdo?
I was born that way.
Okay.
Apparently, according to my parents. It was just something I was fascinated with since a very early age, all sort of horror movies. And, once I discovered cryptozoology, that there may be real life monsters, so to speak, in the world. I just read all the books that I could on that. I eventually saw a movie called The Legend of Boggy Creek back in the late 70s, and that was a Bigfoot-like creature in southern Arkansas that where I lived. So that really captured my imagination, and then from there it's just sort of a lifelong fascination. And once I eventually wrote a book on the history of the Legend of Boggy Creek, that sort of brought me into this world of cryptozoology and radio, podcast, TV, and everything else.
Nice. Now, I've seen the Boggy Creek movie. I remember Allison got it on DVD, and we all watched it one night. And so for the people that maybe aren't familiar with the Legend of Boggy Creek, can you maybe just get us up to speed real quick in your, the 2-minute version of your probably 200-page book?
Well, basically, The Legend of Boggy Creek was a movie that came out in 1972. It's sort of a docudrama horror movie, but it was inspired and based on real-life sightings of a Bigfoot-like creature in southern Arkansas near the Texas and Louisiana borders. Now, I'm from Texas, so, of course, that's close to me.
Right.
And this was one of the first times that people realized there was Bigfoot creatures in other places than the Pacific Northwest. I mean, newspapers had run articles like this, but the Boggy Creek case was significant because there was a lot of sightings, there was a lot of newspaper coverage, a lot of hype on it. So when the movie came out in the 70s, it was a huge hit. It played in drive-ins and movie theaters and eventually on TV, and made millions of dollars. So people of a certain age, pretty much all knew of that movie. I mean, I've run into countless people. I love the movie. Kind of have a Southern flavor. And when I was looking for a subject to write a book, I thought, man, that'd be perfect. It's sort of, it's got a Bigfoot mystery. It's got, Southern flavor to it. And I just set out to write a book, which was the history of the sightings, which dated back many years. And then the making of the movie and how all that played in. And then as well, there are still sightings in that area. So, it wasn't so much a history book, but a book that was a continuing story. So all of that is basically The Beast of Boggy Creek, which was my first book.
Well, I like what you were saying there when you were saying that the sightings in the Pacific Northwest versus Boggy Creek, which had a Southern flavor. And so is there anything unique or uniquely to the Beast of Boggy Creek that's different than what we read, like we think about the Sasquatch or Harry and the Hendersons or something like that is our picture of it? Is there something like, is he drinking a mint julep or something like that, or a cowboy hat? Like what's unique about the Legend of Boggy Creek?
Well, it might be nice if he was drinking a mint julep, but he was he was known to be aggressive and attack people. And that was one of the things that made a great horror movie, because in real life, people had reported, this creature stalking around their homes, trying to get in. There was a lot of, shotgun fire going on down there, that sort of thing. So, it's something that was a little bit different. I mean, Bigfoot, we sort of had the Patterson-Gimlin film, a creature that sort of gave a wary glance back, but it didn't attack. It could have. It just sort of said, hey, I know you're there. I'm walking on. Most of the Bigfoot reports that had come in were footprints found and, brief glimpses of it. But with the Boggy Creek case, what you had is, some excitement and, sensational accounts where the creature had attacked people. So that was kind of it. It was a little taller, leaner, meaner type of a thing. The hair was longer. So it kind of just had that kind of Southern swampy kind of feel to it, as opposed to, the bulkier Bigfoot of the Pacific Northwest.
Just in the past year, people talking about Bigfoot, it's something I never thought about as a kid, is that when I was always thinking about Bigfoot, I was just thinking of an undiscovered species. That this is, that Bigfoot will be completely within the realms of regular science. It's just a kind of hominid that we hadn't discovered yet, or a kind of great ape, unique to the United States or North America, that we just hadn't had been able to discover, been able to categorize in the whole thing. And then people started talking about Bigfoot sightings accompanied by men in black or UFOs or high strangeness associated with, once you see Bigfoot, then you start seeing other things. Is there any of that, like in Boggy Creek, like people would have sightings of something and then maybe something else unusual would happen to them?
It's all just purely sightings. There was no use, paranormal activity, disappearing or anything like that. It just appeared to be, some sort of a biological creature.
Okay. And I think that's a really good distinction, because more and more people are focusing on on weirdness happening along with that. And it seems like Boggy Creek would be more of a standard, like how we think of a materialist perspective when it comes to, cryptozoology. What do you think is the best hypothesis, or what do you think is your best guess at what might the creature of Boggy Creek have been?
Well, it's all purely speculation, obviously. And, I think operate under the premise that, Bigfoot and derivative creatures in the South are, some sort of undiscovered primate, a hominid, like you say, that has somehow miraculously managed to remain elusive all this time. I mean, animals can do amazing things, and if there was a small population of these that had a certain higher intelligence, then it's possible that they could, manage to stay hidden with only a few sightings here and there. But that's just my speculation. I mean, a lot of people thought that it could have been some other sort of ape, an orangutan, a chimpanzee, anything like that. I mean, so everything was just sort of thrown out there. And of course, compared to Sasquatch. So I think that, if you start looking into the southern sightings, including skunk ape all the way to Florida, you do kind of get a feel that the creatures could be somewhat different than, the traditional Bigfoot. And that could just be, something related or a species or adaptations the creatures had undergone from living in a completely different environment, which was often swampier and obviously a lot more hot down here. So, but I see all the other theories, and I think those all come into play when you have something you cannot solve. I mean, people have these sightings. You're just looking for explanation. So, it's just really hard to say what these creatures are. You just keep, taking reports and trying to build some sort of a profile.
So it sounds to me, Lyle, like you're more of like a flesh and blood than paranormal cryptozoologist. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, that would be accurate. I mean, I've taken hundreds of Bigfoot reports, and very few of them are paranormal in nature. A lot of those people pass those around. It seems like there's a lot more, but in almost every one, there's no UFO reports. There's no Men in Black. There's no weird, thing that it did. It just seemed like some sort of an animal of some sort that was exposed for a moment and then went back into the woods. So just basing on my personal interviews, and I have gotten some weird reports, but typically those I find not very credible. The ones that have all this other bizarre stuff to it, not so credible, but occasionally there's some that I just can't explain. So, for lack of any other proof, I just sort of operate under the assumption that this is some sort of an ape. And until I can, if I see one or if somebody has a body or something, we can certainly make better, conclusions.
Until one materializes and disappears before your eyes, then you're like, no, it's probably got to go back to a cave somewhere.
If it does that, then I may adjust my theory.
There are some people that speculate, or even witnesses that was talking to one yesterday that report that Bigfoot type creatures may have some type of, I don't want to say powers, but have some skills that humans don't necessarily possess. More in line of like echolocation, being able to stun their prey, like dolphins do, for example, or cause vibrations in the environment through some other method, or some other kind of hiding or obfuscation technique that they have that maybe other animals have. Have you heard any of those type of things having to do with the more southern reports?
In a few cases, and yeah, I mean, I agree that they could have some of these abilities that aren't typical of most animals, and I mean, it still is in the realm of natural creatures. They can just do amazing things, and I mean, I've been out on survival training with Marines, and those guys can disappear right in front of your eyes. Literally, they are trained. You can look right at them and not see them. And I got some of that training and realized, wow, if a person, a Marine, a human can do this, then if these animals have any sort of, above average abilities, then they certainly could do miraculous looking things. And there is a few reports I've gotten from witnesses in which the witness was overcome with fear, almost as if, the creature was projecting some sort of almost a mental thing. I mean, but,
or maybe EMF, right? Because EMF can create that in people. So
something like that. And they couldn't explain the fear that had overcome them. So you've got those. And I think, I mean, they could have something like this. And if they could do that, then certainly it starts getting in the realms of what seems supernatural. But, it's not magic. It's purely things that we don't understand.
Yeah, some kind of adaptation that, and some of it, like echolocation, like stunning your prey using that, I mean, does have a natural precedent.
Right. Yeah. I mean, other creatures can do things like that. So, it's not out of the realm of possibility that Bigfoot of any sort could do something of that nature.
I can't be the only person that every time somebody says EMF, like in the back of my head, I hear, "You're unbelievable." Oh, like, does anybody, like, every time someone's like, "Oh yeah, it must be EMF." And I'm like,
yeah, that's me too. I love that.
Well, now that's what's going to happen.
I've ruined the K2 for everybody.
Oh. So I want to talk Lizard Man too. So you also did a book about lizard men. Can you tell us a little bit about that cryptid?
There are a classification of cryptids known as lizard men, and these are basically reptilian humanoid type creatures that have been seen in a variety of places in North America and elsewhere. My book focuses on a case from the late 80s near Bishopville, South Carolina, the Bishopville Lizard Man. And that was one that I kind of ran across in a lot of, cryptozoology books from time to time. And I was really fascinated with that because it was just like people saying that they had seen a creature from the Black Lagoon, essentially, in this, rural area of South Carolina. So it was a case that, I wanted to know more about. So I went out to Bishopville sometime after my Beast of Boggy Creek book had come out and just sort of looked into that case. And there was a retired sheriff out there that had been there when all these reports and the witnesses were coming forward in the late 80s. And he investigated the case and had a lot of police files on it. Now, I mean, he wasn't necessarily convinced there was a quote unquote lizard man, but he was convinced that the people had seen something and it was something strange and he had to look into it. So, that creature, obviously, you're getting into deeper realms where how do you explain biologically something that, is anthropomorphic or human-like, but has reptilian characteristics. And of course, there's a lot of theories about that sort of thing. But to me, in my books, I simply just tell the story. I mean, I'm not trying to necessarily, make people believe in any certain thing. I mean, I offer the theories and then people can decide. So in that case, it was just extremely strange. And it was this creature. And again, there was some sensational stories where it attacked a young man in that skateboard swamp. So you had the attacks, you had the creature, just another one of these great Southern monster mysteries.
Well, with this particular lizard man attack, so when people saw the lizard man, like when people see Bigfoot, they can picture they always think about the Patterson-Gimlin film, and they're always seeing a kind of a primate. Like we're conditioned to be able to think about like what gorillas look like or what chimps or orangutans look like. But when people see like a lizard man, it wasn't like in clothes or anything, or when you say anthropomorphized, it wasn't like a lizard masquerading as a person, or was it just a humanoid lizard, like naked? And you know what I mean, in the swamp, or what were? Well, what did the sightings entail? Because to me, like if it was David Icke talking, he'd be like, well, Prince Charles ripped his face off, and there was a lizard underneath. So
right. Well, yeah. What's the difference?
Well, and that's the thing. If you look at the newspaper reports at the time, and there was a lot of them. This thing was featured even on like Good Morning America and things. It was just a huge deal. The newspaper illustrations would often draw like what looked like a lizard with a long, mouth and a tail and all this stuff, but that's not what the witnesses described. They did describe something that was roughly human in nature. It stood upright. It was maybe 6 or 7 feet tall. They said, obviously it wore no clothes. It looked to be either brownish or green. It looked like it was scaly or reptilian in some way. And, some had a better look at it and described it as having like 3-fingered hands, claws, things like that. But, it's just a little bit more well, I don't know, I'd say plausible, but it wasn't, it wasn't a crocodile running around upright in clothes, chasing people. And sometimes the drawings were literally something like that. It was ridiculous. But if you read the police reports, even some of those say that to them, it looked like it may have had even like brownish hair. I mean, people at night seeing things, it's not posing for a picture. So the basic generalities were that it was a humanoid type reptilian creature, but there's details that you have to try to sort between.
So it seemed like an animal, not like a humanoid, like we're humanoids. So it seemed more animalistic than, what David Icke would talk about, some kind of shape-shifting creature that appears human but's really lizard underneath.
Yeah, I mean, that it's different than that. I mean, these were the sightings here. You're in mostly in a remote swamp. Bishopville's a very small town. There's woods all around it. Wasn't a sort of thing where somebody saw a person and they transformed or just even briefly transformed. None of that. It appeared to be, like I said, like a creature from the Black Lagoon that had come up out of Scape Ore Swamp. So it was much more. To me, I looked at it as a cryptozoology case, but others could obviously look at it as something more along David Icke, I guess.
Yeah. And with the Bishopville creature, didn't it I might be mixing this with other cases, so please forgive me if I am, but didn't it attack a car?
Yeah. In July of 1988, the most famous sighting is when Christopher Davis, a young man who was working late at a fast food restaurant near Bishopville, had to drive home through the Scape Ore Swamp area. He had a flat tire out there, and as he finished up changing the tire and putting the jack back into his trunk, he sees something coming at him across the fennel grass out there. It was enough moonlight that he could see well enough, and at first he thought it was a person. I mean, it was upright, it was moving towards him fairly rapidly. Of course, I mean, that's scary enough. I mean, you're out there in the middle of nowhere. It's not where you want to have a flat tire, and he's scared from that aspect. But he said as it got closer, it appeared to be something that was not human, something reptilian. And he said, of course, he jumps into his vehicle and fires it up and starts trying to get out of there, and the thing jumps on the car and tries to reach in. It's reaching in through the window trying to grab him. He had his window down. It was July,
Terrifying.
Very scary. He said he managed to swerve. It fell off, and it still was running after him. And, got away eventually. And that became sort of the cornerstone sighting, and, of course, the most sensational of these witness encounters. And that was one that the sheriff had interviewed him. He had taken lie detector tests, and the police felt that absolutely something happened to that kid. He saw something. They just couldn't figure out what it was.
And was there actual documented damage?
Yes. There was damage on the car, broken driver's side window, mirror, and some scratches or something like that his father examined when he got home, because Christopher ran in the house just, white as a sheet, scared to death. His father's like, what happened? And he kind of explained. So his father went out and looked at the car. They didn't go to the police right away because they just didn't know what to say. I mean, like, what do you do? But by happenstance, a couple of weeks later, there was some other incidents that happened that news reporters got wind of and put it in the paper. So then Christopher Davis's dad thought, well, this could be one and the same type creature. So they came to the police at that point.
Well, that's an interesting development right there. Like, I like how that is. So you have so this lizard man things happen, and the dad might be like, oh God, the kid got into an accident, and now he's talking about lizard people. Like, he's probably high, working at Taco Bell. All right. But then 2 weeks later, the lizard man attacks somebody or whatever. And then he's like, well, how can this, it's that kind of corroboration, like in the days before the internet, in the days before a silly forum post or whatever could spread through like wildfire. So that makes it interesting. Like, okay, now we come forward because, yeah, my son he met the lizard man a couple weeks ago and he attacked the car. What I think, though, something like this, though, is that you're talking about swampy areas. When you talk about Bishopville, it's South Carolina?
Yes.
In that area, would these people have been familiar with alligators? Like, is that an area where, so they know the difference? Like, if people are familiar with a certain kind of creature, you'd be like, okay, yeah, that's not just an alligator, because we know what an alligator looks like, and an alligator doesn't jump up and break the window.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't say there's a lot of alligators in this area where this occurred in that part of the swamp, because it's sort of it's in a channel at that point, but absolutely they knew the difference between an alligator and something like this. I mean, even a bear. I mean, the people could distinguish between that. I mean, they lived in this rural area, and stories had circulated prior to this. Once the police got involved, they realized that the locals had been talking about this for going on a year or a couple of years before that, but no one had ever gone to the police. It wasn't until a newspaper reporter just happened to be on site when they investigated one of the incidents that it involved a car, that once it got out in the news, then here comes Christopher Davis, and here comes a couple of other old timers that came forward and said, well, don't think that kid's crazy, because I saw something down in the swamp a couple of years ago, but I mean, what did you do with that information? So Then, it seems to corroborate everything that's going on.
And so you've also been involved in the Small Town Monsters video series. So you've been investigating many, many different types of creatures of late, haven't you?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I mean, I've investigated or taken reports of sightings of just about every sort of cryptid, and been able to, in some cases write books, and in some cases translate those to the films with Small Town Monsters. So, I mean, there's always a ongoing, research into every sort of cryptid.
Can you talk a little bit more about those films and your production work with those films?
Yeah, if anybody hasn't seen the Small Town Monsters films, they're a documentary series done by director Seth Breedlove, and the company is basically located in Ohio. He had done a couple of them. He did the Minerva Monster from another kind of Bigfooty case from Ohio, and he did the Beast of Whitehall, which is the famous Bigfoot in New York. And for his third film, eventually when you do something called Small Town Monsters, you got to do Legend of Boggy Creek. I mean, you have to do the Fouke Monster. So Seth and I had met before he ever started this, and we had discussed our love for these sort of small town monster cases. And so his third film, he wanted to do Boggy Creek. So obviously I'd done all the research, all the work on that. So we collaborated to bring that to film. I'm the narrator. I helped write the script, helped arrange all the filming and the witnesses, and I'm seen in that film. So in parts, it's kind of me in real life talking to the witnesses. That worked very well. So going forward, the next film was The Mothman of Point Pleasant. So for that one, most of these, I mean, I'm not in the film, in that one, but I narrated and was the executive producer. So I was involved in that way. And then going forward, we're going to do one, the Bray Road Beast on the famous Dogman case.
Hey, we're talking to you from Wisconsin, so
yeah,
and we're great friends with Linda Godfrey, so I'm excited to hear that.
And been to Bray Road. And Wendy, what did we see?
What did we see?
Yeah.
We heard some scary sounds.
Yeah, no.
That was mainly because of the burritos, right?
Nice.
No red eyes. But when you come up here to Wisconsin, please let us know.
Do you typically go to the locations yourself?
Well, I mean, obviously, when I was in the Boggy Creek film, we filmed on location. For Mothman, I wasn't along for any of the interviews. I've been to Point Pleasant quite a few times and have that. For the Bray Road Beast, I'm not sure if I'll be on set for that or not, but I assume as we have planned or tentatively, I'll narrate that one as I've done the other ones and be involved in some aspect of the film production.
When is that expected to be out?
I'm honestly not sure what the schedule of release is. It starts filming in March, I believe, and sometime around the spring. So, usually it's about 6 months. So I would assume something in the way of October, but, don't quote me on that.
Perfect.
Yeah, well, we won't, but
You should
I'm just
come
so
up,
excited to hear about that.
Bring your band Ghoultown to Wisconsin.
Right.
And then we can all get together and play a show and have it like be a paranormal themed show in Wisconsin near Bray Road, because there's Delavan and East Troy and Elkhorn, and they all have little dive bars that we can invade for the evening.
Well, I will throw that at them and see if they will consent.
That sounds like a plan.
That sounds like a paranormal party. We're going. Well, something I'm interested in, Lyle, is yourself, that you've gone to all these locations. You guys are doing production, and we haven't done a lot of paranormal videos, but when we've gone out and shot music videos or little film projects, you'd be in the forest, sometimes in the middle of the night, you and a light and a camera and maybe a couple of actors and maybe an assistant. If it's a lucky day, there's an assistant. So when you're out there shooting, you could see something. Sometimes you're in the middle of nowhere and you could see something. You could hear something. When you've been out there exploring, investigating, producing things, have you had any experiences that you can't explain?
Well, I mean, in the case of filming Boggy Creek Monster, we were filming an interview with one of the witnesses and a witness that I had known previously and find is a credible guy. We were interviewing him at the spot where he had seen had an encounter several years ago, and right as we were doing the interview, you hear this bizarre howling moan come out of the swamp, and I could see the camera guys sort of like they kind of looked and they're like, "What was that?" And just like as casually and nonchalantly as you can imagine, our witness just said, "Well, that was one of them right there."
Oh my God. And the cameraman and the sound guy's like, "This is way too real."
Yeah. And I mean, it was pretty spooky. We were racing because it was so muddy that we couldn't even get one of the vehicles. They were basically following me around because I knew all the spots to go. And I have a 4-wheel drive truck. They couldn't get their rent vehicle to the location. It had rained. It was too muddy. So we had taken a skeleton crew, if you will, to down there to film. And so we were running low, running behind, and the light was, failing. The sun was going down, and this right at the time that this howl occurred. So, I mean, you never know what you're going to get out there. And of course, that was an unexpected thing that went on. And if you watch the movie, you can see that he puts that in there and say, while we were on, I narrate or whatever, while we were on location, we experienced an unexplained howl that sounds much like those alleged vocalizations of Bigfoot. And so, right then and there, it's just a cool thing to happen.
I have a question about, you've taken in all these witness reports, and I wanted to ask about like how you judge witness credibility or the credibility of accounts. What is your process? Well,
I mean, some of it is got to be purely instinct, your gut feeling. I mean, because ultimately, you don't know these people well, and you just have to try to get what you can out of it. But I mean, after doing so many, you can see the pattern on the ones that are less credible. They have something seems like a solid encounter, and then suddenly there's more and more and more and more and more, all this stuff. Oh, and also a UFO, and also a lizard man, and all, you kind of build a profile of these people. And so my process is to sort of eliminate those that I feel are just way out there, and also look at the person. I mean, you got to look what are they well spoken? What's their occupation? Where did they see this? What is the description? I mean, if the description is, well, it was exactly 6'9". All these, you tend to get too detailed. A red flag goes up. But all of this you have to put together to try to eliminate those that seem not necessarily that they're making things up, but making more of something, making more of a shadow or a tree, and separate that from the people that you believe actually have seen something. And some of these witnesses I get to know, especially in the Boggy Creek case. I interviewed some of these guys nearly 10 years ago. I still know them. When I go up to Falk, I still see them. And those are ones that, you can really make a better decision because you've known this person for a much longer time rather than somebody you just met or somebody you talk on the phone. So, each one's different, and my process is just to try to be as neutral as possible, listen to what they say, ask as many questions as I can, and when possible, go to the place where they saw it and interview them on site. And that usually gives me a sense of what it was.
What I'm interested in too is, like when you were talking about the Bishopville sightings, we're talking about Boggy Creek, the police got involved. There was well, we better go check this out. So how many cases do you think do the police get involved of checking out monsters, even if they think the idea is crazy or whatever, but they still have to check it out, or they still take the time to check it out? And has that changed over time, where people might have relied on the police before, or now they don't go to the police as much, or they don't bring in the authorities? Because it seems like, especially even in the Mothman case and stuff, like people were calling the cops. They were like, I saw something weird, and they call. Do people still call the cops? Has that changed at all?
Well, I don't think it's changed in that people do still call the police and report these things. But I think the police these days are a lot more skeptical and a lot less willing to go out and look into sighting of a Bigfoot or something. You see it in going back in time. You do see that the police back in earlier times would actually look into these. I mean, I've got newspaper reports from the 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s, and almost all of that, where you have a flap of sightings, the police got involved and oftentimes organized hunts to look for these things. Would get the posse out and go in the woods. In the 70s, he took these reports seriously. And he just was trying to find the truth. And we interviewed him in the film. And you see right there that when you listen to this guy, you're like, something was going on down there, And again, he tried to remain neutral, but he did have his officers looked into it. He personally looked into it. In the case of the Bishopville Lizard Man, late 80s. There's a case in the 90s in which a huge Bigfoot-like footprint was found near Elkins Creek in Georgia. That was found by a deputy officer who went down there in his own time during the day because he was convinced that these people were seeing some unexplained thing around their home. Well, he found this huge track. It's one of the best Bigfoot tracks ever found. Moving forward, though, like I said, if you call the cops now, unless you got a really good story, they're probably not going to go and look. It's too TV icon, a pop culture thing now, and they just don't want to deal with it.
Well, I tell you, I'm in Manitowoc, Wisconsin right now, the home of Making a Murderer. So if I call the cops around here, they'll probably frame me for a homicide. So I'm not calling anybody.
I wouldn't do that if I were you.
Yeah. And speaking of controversial subjects, well, we are in Wisconsin and not that far from Chicago. And I really admire you as a monster hunter, Lyle, especially that you've talked to so many witnesses and you try to talk to them at the location where the sightings happen. And it sounds like you really try to vet your reports to separate fact from fiction. And I, with these Chicago Mothman sightings, was so excited initially because I'm like, well, this is close enough. I can get there. And I can see what I can find out. So that's what I did for several months. Every weekend was down and drove down in Chicagoland and went to each of the 60 original Chicago Mothman sighting locations and documented them all on video on YouTube. It's youtube.com/Mothman. And unfortunately, what I discovered is the bulk of the reports didn't match up with, some basic like landmarks, for instance. And I found, them to be very implausible when I was actually on the ground, boots on the ground, seeing the location. Are you aware at all of the Chicagoland Mothman sightings of, mainly 2017, although there are a couple in 2011?
Yeah, surely. I mean, I've followed a lot of those reports that Lon Strickler posted on his Phantoms and Monsters site, and that's where I was reading about it. And it was one of those things where, I would, like, if I had enough time and money to get on that one, I would have wanted to go up there and do exactly what you did. And it's great. What you did is good stuff, because a lot of times, these reports are just posted verbatim without somebody having gone to the site. And, that's okay if it's one or two, but when they start adding up like that, you got to be a little skeptical. It's like, okay, this is good. Here's another one. Here's another, and I was kind of thinking, some of those, it was like, it was very clear and the sighting was up close with 3 or 4 people, yet, I hadn't seen any news coverage, it just, something was kind of suspicious about those. So, I'm no expert and obviously haven't looked into them like you have, but that's the kind of investigation that needs to happen on this stuff. Is somebody needs to go there and go, is this a place where this could have even happened? You're trying to match up the reports, good stuff.
I'd like to follow up with that though, because Lyle, like you said, you follow different stuff from all over the country. And you've probably looked into reports and looking into the small town stuff and look into the things that have been overlooked. And so as a monster hunter, like you said, like, man, if I'd had the wherewithal, I'd have gotten to Chicago right away, check that out. Right, 70 reports, everybody's like, you got to go. But is there something you think is criminally overlooked in the world of monster hunting that you're like, you know what, no one's investigated this. And as soon as I can figure out a way, I'm jumping on this because I wish that somebody had investigated it the right way, or something you saw that hasn't been fully, I hate to use the word exploited, but investigated or thoroughly enough checked out in your stories, especially because you probably get a lot and read a lot of the reports from places that we haven't heard about.
There's none that's like, monumentally, unreported or things like that. But almost in all of these, I find that there's more to the story than what's kind of glossed over in books, like the Lizard Man case. I'd read about that. It's just piecemeal. But when you go up there, suddenly I found reports that had never been published and information and things like that. There's some always on my list. It's hard to like even get to them all. But I find that even if there's a small amount, if you actually can go there, you can find more. The Chicago Mothman's a case where, in that case, like the reverse stuff was just coming out, whether without having to do anything. But usually it's the opposite. If you go and talk to the locals and they go, oh yeah, people saw that, and maybe I know of 3 sightings. Suddenly I know now of 8 or 9 more because I went there. And there's a case of a river monster where I have a really killer video, and it's been analyzed by software experts. And there's one where I did some digging, and suddenly a woman said she had seen basically a prehistoric like creature in this river. And I'm like, okay, that's on my list definitely to follow up. And I just sort of have a running list. And sometimes the economics of this, people think that I get paid to go around and and look into these things.
Wouldn't that be a dream job?
Right. You don't really get paid for looking into them. I have to translate these into books and things. And I just don't just put stuff on blogs, because I like to check it out more thoroughly. If it makes it to my book, then that's the ones I've spent a lot of time on, or one of my film projects. So there's kind of a list, and the way I can make these happen, if I can turn it into a film or a book, then that kind of offsets the cost of doing it. So it's a real challenge, to be able to facilitate these, as you all well know, to go and get in more in depth into these and sort of make it worth your while. So there's a list I have going. So,
well, where was that river monster? I mean,
maybe he wants to keep it on the
we're
down
low. We're not going to steal it from him. Like he said,
this is public.
But I'm just interested to see, like, if it was a specific area or there's more to it.
Well, the only reason I'm hesitant on that is because there is a film project in the works which would encompass that.
Keep it on the down low. It's all right.
Being somewhat vague, but I will say it was in the Louisiana area, and this kind of ties in with another more famous case from Arkansas, the White River Monster. That's more of an older case, but there was a lot of newspaper coverage and many sightings. So this is in the southern area like that, which you don't have a lot of quote unquote river monsters around here. I mean, in the northern part of America, you have tons of lake monsters. You know what I mean? But again, in the south,
yeah.
I mean, we don't have a lot of that. I mean, you got the Oklahoma octopus, which I don't find it's like the coolest cryptid name, but I don't find a lot of credibility to that.
Good alliteration.
Yeah, I mean that's good stuff, and if I can turn that into a movie, I will.
Well, Lyle, it is just so awesome to talk to you, and I'm really excited about what you said about how you vet witnesses, and it just seems to me to be crucial for people to understand that when you write a book, you really spend time, making sure that the best cases get into the book. And I think what we have to watch out for is, people just calling in cases and then them just being spread on the internet as if it's gospel.
That's just like believing the people that call into Coast to Coast on Fridays, like the Coast to Coast open call in. Like you listen to it and you're like, wow, if this stuff is real, there's really, that's like publishing that as a book and saying, hey guys, this is real.
So it's really refreshing to hear the way your process is, because to me, I agree with you. If you go to an area and the story gets bigger, I mean, you knew about a little something and then you go and then it's like, wow, there's so many witnesses that claim to have seen it. I mean, then you have something you can sink your teeth in. Whereas I found the opposite was true with the Chicago Mothman. There was such a big, fervor with all these reports. And then you go to the actual location and these reports seem to unravel. And there isn't, that evidence there that you would expect.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think, that's good stuff. And whenever possible, that's the way these things need to be undertaken. And for me, I think the story is still interesting. That's the thing. I'm not trying to force an agenda or make people to believe into it. If we go to Chicago and we look into this story and it unravels, it's still a cool story, like how this even happened and like what were these reports. And I looked here and I looked there. That's a YouTube series right there.
And it's still Forteana. It's still Forteana, right. Like the social phenomena of it.
It's still cool. So I see so much of a problem now with all these, call-in radio shows with every week somebody's reporting the most unbelievable Sasquatch encounter. I'm like, what was the screening process on this? Because some of those are probably legit. Maybe some of them aren't, because I've got a whole pile of stuff that are not in my books. People that I interviewed, you got to talk to this guy. I'm like, that's a bunch of nonsense, and I just don't include it. There's plenty of other sightings. And I mean, of course, when you're talking about older cases with the newspaper and reports and things like that, all I can do is report what the news said, and that's not always 100% accurate, but it's still part of the story. The best I can do is go to the area, look around, and go, is this a place where something happened or could have happened, and interview what modern witnesses there are and try to get a firsthand story, at least some firsthand stories in every case. So that's kind of the way the best you can do.
So Lyle, now that we know your process a little bit. What is your favorite? Like when you go through and you think about your research or think about the books you've written and the time you spent, we've obviously all spent a good portion of our lives looking at things that a lot of people like look at us like, what are you weird? And you're like, yeah, I'm weird.
Yeah.
So when you're going through and you're thinking about your favorite bits, who is your number one monster?
Well, it has to be the Boggy Creek Falk monster. I mean, it's, I've just become, the spokesperson, I guess, for that case. And I mean, known for that, and now films and books. And I've written a follow-up called Beyond Boggy Creek. So almost everything I do somehow gets related to Boggy Creek. And I've worked a lot with the small town to try to offer something for visitors to look at, because people come from all over the states, all over the country. So that's my favorite monster. And it's so surreal in such a way, because as a kid watching that film back at a drive-in when I was a little kid, to imagine that I would someday be part of that story, that I would know the people. I could go to that town and people recognize me, and I know all the spots where all the things occurred. It's just mind-blowing. So that's my case, and probably what I'll be most remembered for. People still interview me about the Falk Monster book as much right now as they did when it came out, along with all the other stuff. So it's my favorite. It's my hometown monster, so to speak.
Well, that's how we feel about the Beast of Bray Road. Because it's like when we were growing up, like I remember like in the early 90s, the sightings would be, and they'd be on the news, that the two glowing red eyes, and somebody saw a wolf man and Elkhorn. You're like, whoa, wolf man and Elkhorn? That's like 15 minutes away. All right.
This is the coolest news report ever.
Well, so if you were putting together, so like Wendy's been to the Mothman Museum in Point Pleasant, and they got a whole bunch of stuff there. If you were putting together the Boggy Creek Museum, like what kind of exhibits would it have, or what kind of documentation would you, you'd obviously have a theater that shows the movie and then maybe shows your movie too. You're like, well, I get a royalty every time my movie plays. So you want to play it like 6 times a day, kind of thing. So what would you have in the Boggy Creek Museum?
Well, that's not too far from reality, because at the Expedition Bigfoot Museum in Georgia, I've assisted with a display there on Boggy Creek. And we've slowly been working on something better at what's called the Monster Mart in Falk. And Monster Mart, just if somebody Googles that, there's a giant Bigfoot head on it. It's the coolest convenience store ever. We're working on a section. So what I would have in that display is what will be in that display. We have press materials from the making of the movie. We've got 35 millimeter reels of the movie, of the trailer. I've got pieces of some of the homes that you see in the movie, screens from the windows, boards, photos of locations. I've got looking over there. There was somebody in the film that was featured, an old hermit. I went out and excavated his old shack, which was built in the middle of the bayou, in Mercer Bayou. This guy just lived out there, and he was shown in the movie and kind of became popular from that. I excavated his stuff. I've got, moonshine bottles. I've got pieces of his shack. That kind of thing would be in there. Posters. We have a lot of tracks and things that have been found, a lot of souvenirs, memorabilia. That would all be there. Pieces. Smokey Crabtree is a figure that was in the movie. He was kind of the Boggy Creek guy before me.
His name was Smokey Crabtree?
Smokey Crabtree.
Yeah. You remember I brought it to the
No, I remember we were talking about
the cabin,
movie earlier. I just forgot the name. The guy's name was Smokey Crabtree, which I would pick that. That's the next time I check into a hotel, that's gonna be my secret name.
His real name, first name was Julius. So you say, Smokey sounded cool. And, he was, I've been working with his son to get some, perhaps a hunting outfit or something from Smokey, because he's so well known. He's written several books. So all of that would be in this museum, and something we're actually working on in Falk to give people something a little bit more to see when they go there.
I want to go to the Monster Mart.
Yeah, let's.
Sounds awesome.
I mean, it's great.
Well, before we wrap, one last question for you, Lyle. So we get down to Texas every year for South by Southwest. We drive through Texas. We always, usually drive through Dallas and Fort Worth sometime before we hit Austin. Is there a great stop off or a great town or anything like that? Any small town monster ways on the way down through Texas on the way to Austin that we'd have to stop by, take a picture or something like that, that you'd recommend?
Well, there's the Lake Worth Monster, which is near Fort Worth, not far from me. That was a case. There's no small town necessarily associated with that, but it's a famous case that you can visit the location where some of the witnesses were attacked back in 1969. If you veered off, you could go to the Monster Mart if you took that route. It's maybe a little bit out of the way, I think, from Wisconsin route, but that would be the closest and most significant and awesome right there. I mean, just a photo with the Bigfoot on the front of the Monster Mart is something that all people who are interested in this should have. That would be the best. And when you're in Austin, you need to go to the Museum of the Weird. If you haven't, it's
not yet.
What?
I mean, housed there is the original Minnesota Iceman, the famous Minnesota Iceman. It's got displays on Bigfoot. It's got a cool little section on some investigator named Blackburn.
Hey, all right.
Yeah. And hey, another local connection, the Minnesota Iceman, discovered right here in Wisconsin at State Fair Park in Milwaukee. That's where the original was found.
Right, and he, my friend Steve Boosty owns the Museum of the Weird. So it's located in the Lucky Lizard store on 6th Street. So you definitely got to go in there, tell Steve, or just tell the staff that your friends at mine, and you check out the museum. It's a that's a definite stop. You could see the
Awesome.
Minnesota Iceman thing. As seen on Shipping Wars, we did it was when Steve purchased that, it was from Minnesota. We did a Shipping Wars episode that I was also on in order to transport it here. So people are like, what were you on Shipping Wars? I'm like, they did a Minnesota Iceman thing. I'm on it.
That's fantastic. I can't wait to check that out.
We'll definitely we're definitely going in March. So
Cool, that's awesome.
Now, where can people find more of your stuff? Where can they listen to your band? Like, before we go, we got to tell everybody where to find more about Lyle Blackburn.
Well, you could always start at my website, lyleblackburn.com. It's got links to everything from there. I've got my online store where you can buy autographed books and things from me. It links off to my band Ghoultown, which is a whole nother topic. And of course, my books are also available on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com. They come in all the flavors in ebook and Kindle and Nook and everything else. So if you just search me, hit my website, it's got information and all the Small Town Monsters movies. There's plenty of links there.
Perfect. Thank you very much for spending some time today with us, Lyle.
Thanks,
Hey, I
Lyle.
appreciate it.
Thank
thanks so
you.
much.
And now, inspired by Lyle's series Small Town Monsters, let's go straight to the Sunspot Song of the Week. And this one is called The Middle of Nowhere. It looks like apple pie and county fairs, baseball games and Sunday prayers. Something strikes uncanny all the same. Watch for the devil, hide and concealed. Hide from the children in the cornfield, 'cause you know that nothing is the way it seems. And we don't need to lock our doors, 'cause evil don't need to knock. And on every Main Street square looks a force under the block. Somewhere in America, the dead will start to walk. In the middle of nowhere, you can't escape the dark. Watch for the devil hiding concealed. Hide from the children in the cornfield. Cause you know that nothing is the way it seems. And we don't need to lock our doors, cause evil don't need to knock. And on every Main Street square lurks a force under the block. Somewhere in America the dead will start to walk. In the middle of nowhere, you can't escape the dark.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. You can find us online at othersidepodcast.com. Until next time, see you on the other side.
Ooh, but before we go,
What?
before we head out of Wisconsin from the cold to the warmth of California,
Yes.
we need to give a shout out to the coolest people we know.
Oh, and that would be our beloved Patreon community. The people who choose to help keep See You on the Other Side podcast and business going every single week with songs, music, podcasts, interviews, videos, presentations at live shows. And Wendy, I've got something else exciting to talk about.
You do?
Yes.
Well,
And
please do.
We just got invited back to be featured performers at the Haunted America Conference in Alton, Illinois again this year.
Yay! I love that conference.
So I know that we met a whole bunch of our listeners at the Haunted America Conference in Alton. So we are heading back, and Sunspot's going to be performing. We're going to have a table, and we'll have various little performances to kick off the conference and throughout the weekend. And everybody who comes and joins us and part of our Patreon is going to get a special gift.
Wow, I cannot wait. That's going to be great.
So if you guys are interested in becoming part of that community where we get to hang out every month, talk about different things, make suggestions for shows, make suggestions for different paranormal stories we cover, the place to do that is when?
Othersidepodcast.com/donate. And a special huge shout out to our Patreon, Ned, who is pledging us at a level where he gets this very shout out on every single episode. And Ned, we love you. Thank you so much for all of your support and your enthusiasm for our podcast and our band.
Dr. Ned, you are a true rocker, and we appreciate your support. And everybody in our Patreon community. If you'd like to join, othersidepodcast.com/donate. A wolfman at Elkhorn. That's like 15 minutes